Hello, my name is Emmy and welcome back to the channel. So usually in this channel I make Spanish related videos, but today we're going to be doing a book related video. My major in college is English literature and I'm in my senior year, and in Japan we graduate in March, and I just finished my thesis 2 days ago. So I was going through hell for the past 3 weeks, and that's why my upload schedule has been horrible for the past month. But I finished writing my thesis, and in celebration of that I want to make a video about my favorite classic literatures. The ones that I would enjoy reading, the ones that are actually fun to read, that isn't too pretentious. So here are my 10 picks of classic literature that won't bore you to death. So the first one I want to talk about is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. The reason why I'm going to talk about this at the very beginning is because I wrote my goddamn thesis on this book. This is about a beautiful young man who falls in love with his own portrait, and he prays that he will be able to preserve his youth and his beauty, and instead that the portrait would bear all his ugliness and, age and all that, and that comes true. So yeah, it's about this guy selling his soul to preserve his youth and his beauty, and it's just such a good plot, and how Oscar Wilde writes it is just so beautiful. His sentences are just so exquisite. Like every single work that Oscar Wilde has done, whether it's poems or essays or short stories or plays or this book, he never misses. But this book especially has an interesting plot, great characters, and I would totally recommend it. And it's also not that long at all. This is 200 pages and it's not even that intense. So this is definitely one of my favorite books of all times, and so I would recommend this wholeheartedly. And the next book I want to talk about is Agatha Christie as a whole, as an author. Not just one book, but Agatha Christie as a genre of books. She writes mysteries, as you probably know, and a lot of people don't really categorize her as classic literature, and I don't know why. And in this video, I'm going to be defining classic literature as, is the author dead or not? That's going to be pretty much the only requirement for this video, whether the author is dead or not. I got so into Agatha Christie when I was in the 6th grade or something like that, around that age, and I read so many of her books. I read a lot. I remember I read so many Poirot books, especially, maybe 40, 50 of them, and as a result, I don't remember any of them. I don't remember a plot of any single one of them, except for The Orient Express. The Orient Express is, I don't have it with me right now, but The Orient Express it's one of her most iconic books, and I urge you, if you've never read the book, watch the movie, then you should go read it, and please avoid spoilers at all costs, because the ending of that is just mind-blowing. And the only Agatha Christie book that I own is And Then There Were None, and this is probably her most famous book of all time. If you want to start with Agatha Christie, I would recommend starting with this and The Orient Express. The next book I want to recommend is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Jane Austen is my favorite author of all time, period. I cannot recommend it enough. Jane Austen has 6 books. I've read all of them, and I still think Pride and Prejudice is her best work. But other than that, my favorites are Emma and Persuasion, and after that probably is Sense and Sensibility. I don't really like Northanger Abbey, and I think Mansfield Park is a little boring. But yeah, I would recommend Pride and Prejudice, and all 6 books are kind of the same story, basically. It's about a single woman who is looking for a man, and they're always approximately in the same class. It's kind of the same story of you going back and forth from people's houses, but that is what Jane Austen does really well. So that doesn't take away anything from her, in my opinion. And it's a really funny, witty book as well. I am sure that you would enjoy it, but I would say that this book is kind of old. It was written about 200 years ago, so the English is pretty difficult. It's hard English, and I think I've only read the English version once, and it was hard to get through. So if English isn't your first language like me, I would recommend that you would find a translation in your own language, because that is probably way easier to read. And the next book I want to talk about is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. This book slaps. People still hype it up, and it deserves to be hyped up. Feeling empty inside when the party's going on. It's very much that kind of vibes, and I feel kind of younger people and in the Gen Z generation, I feel would appreciate this now, although it's written 100 years ago. It's written beautifully. I really want to reread it again, and The Great Gatsby is easy to read. It's very short, so yeah, I would wholeheartedly recommend this classic as well. The next book I want to talk about is George Orwell, 1984. If you think classic literature is boring, read this book. I can't imagine anybody not liking this book. This book it's a dystopian world. It's a world where the government is watching every single thing what you're doing. This book was written in the 1940s, I want to say, I'm not exactly sure, but 1984 is in the future when this was written. So George Orwell is trying to warn the people that this is going to be the world that we're going to be stuck in the future if we keep on going like this. And if you've never read it, I would really recommend you to read it. And I actually didn't read it, I listened to the audiobook of this, and this book is actually in the public domain already. So this goes for most of the books that I'm talking about today, but you can find an audiobook on YouTube. So if this book is too thick for you, then you can go on YouTube, you can find a audiobook for this. So if you've never read this book before, I would urge you to read it at least once in your life because it is a great book. So my next choice for actually fun classic literature is The Captured the Rye by J.D. Salinger. If somebody tells you that this is their favorite book, you should think of it as a red flag. This book is a little bit messed up, and having said that, I love this book. I adore this book. It's about a boy who runs away from school and is walking around New York for a couple of days, and the end, that's the story. But I feel like if you've ever gone through a phase where you just genuinely hate the world, or you're just disappointed in the world, I feel like if you've ever gone through that, or if you are going through that, then this book, it will hit you differently. It will hit you in another level, and I'm just gonna leave you with that. So the next books that I want to talk about are Jane Eyre by Charlotte Brontë and Wuthering Heights by Emily Brontë. They are sisters. These are both very classic English literature pieces. I've only read it in Japanese, as you can tell. Again, these were written about 200 years ago, and so the English is very difficult. Especially I hear that Emily Bronte's sentences are very kind of like complicated and it's hard to read. So again, if you're not an English native, then I would recommend that you would read it in your own language. Okay, let's start with Jane Eyre. So I read Jane Eyre a long time ago. The plot is really fun. It's very dramatic. It's about a girl called Jane Eyre, and it goes through her very tragic childhood into her adulthood, and there's this guy that she's gonna marry, but there's so much drama. There's so much gothic drama going on, and yeah, it's a very dramatic book, and I remember that I really enjoyed reading it. On the other hand, I read Wuthering Heights when I was in high school, and I just read it because I wanted to say that I read it in my college entrance exam interview. And I hated it at the time. I hated this book so much. It's a gothic love story of these two people, and it's a very destructing love. I remember feeling like it destroyed a part of my soul while reading it. I did not enjoy this at all. But I feel like now, after 4 or 5 years, my taste in books have become a little darker. So I'm pretty sure that I would enjoy this if I read it again. And I feel like if I read Jane Eyre right now, I would like it slightly less than I used to, and I would like Wuthering Heights a little more than I used to. So yeah, that's that. Okay, we are on our 9th book, and it is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. So this is probably definitely not classified as classic literature. This used to be one of my favorite books when I was a kid. So it's definitely not difficult to read. And again, I haven't read it in a long time, but I saw the movie, the Greta Gerwig movie, when it came out, and that kind of made me remember how much I love this book so much. But it's a coming of age story of these 4 sisters, and I feel like if you're a girl especially, there's a high chance that you can identify with one of the sisters. And I think that's why this book is so good. I used to identify so strongly with Jo March. I hated being a girl when I was a kid. I wanted to be a boy. I wanted to be a writer. And even like, my sister is such an Amy. My sister is a textbook Amy. And even like how Jo has such a hard time getting along with Amy, that was also such a relatable point for me. So this would always have a big chunk of my heart. So the final book I want to talk about is actually a play, and it is Pygmalion by Bernard Shaw. I've never heard anybody talk about this book as in like I would recommend it, but I did this once in a class and I enjoyed it so much. If you don't know Pygmalion, then you might know the Broadway show or the movie My Fair Lady with Audrey Hepburn in it, and I watched it a long time ago when I was a kid. It was on Japanese television, and that is based on this, but there is a significant difference. So this book is about a linguistic professor finding a working class homeless girl on the street and betting with his friend that he'll be able to change her accent from this really strong London Cockney accent to a ladylike Queen's English accent, and he trains her for 6 months. And I really like this, especially after knowing the movie, because in the movie at the end, the professor and the girl end up being together. Spoiler alert. But in the book it's not that way, and you see why, that it's actually kind of really messed up. It's really wrong of how this professor takes this girl as kind of his own toy and transforms her into becoming this upper class lady, but when he's over with his experiment, he is just like, okay, bye-bye, go back to the streets now. But she doesn't belong in her world anymore. And it makes you think a lot. And I liked this ending way better than the movie. So yeah, I would recommend it. And it's a play, so it's super easy to read. So I would recommend this book. Okay, so that was all 10 books that I wanted to talk about. This is a little different topic of a video, but I really hope you enjoyed it. And I'm happy that I got to use my English literature degree in a video like this. Thank you so much for watching till the end, and I'll see you again in my next video. Bye-bye.